Buddy. Welcome, welcome. It is August 11, 2024. We are here joined by Mr. Adib Masumian. We are so happy to have you, Adib, again, as we are going to speak today on Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe. Now, just a quick introduction, everybody. I'm going to try to simplify the introduction we have that you'll find on clearwaterbahais.org. Clearwaterbahais.org. Should you search Adib Masumian, Adib Masumian, Masumian. You'll find so much on the topic today and about what he's been doing. Adib is definitely a man of action, and when Baha'is say, let deeds, not words, be your adorning, there's a lot of deeds going on. So we're really appreciative that Adib is with us today to speak on the subject of Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe. So just as a short summary, since it was first published around 25 years ago, many English-speaking Baha'is have enjoyed reading Mahmud's diary, a translated account of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey throughout the United States from April to December of 1912. What is not well known in the West, however, is that the chronicler of this account, Mirza Mahmud Zarqani, wrote a sequel that mainly covers Abdu'l-Bahā's subsequent travels in Europe, specifically England, Scotland, France, Germany, Hungary, and Austria from December 1912 until June 1913. And of course, it concludes with glimpses of his return to the East, with Abdu'l-Bahá sojourning initially in Egypt for several months before finally arriving in the Holy Land in December of 1913, where he would remain for the rest of his life. A little more than 100 years after its original publication in Persian, this second volume has just been made available in English translation under the title Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe, 1912 to 1913. The value of this book lies not only in its reverent depiction of Abdu'l-Bahā's exemplary conduct in English translation, as he interacted with people from all walks of life and holders of various ranks, including Nobel laureates, but also in his transcripts of more than 200 of his oral remarks, among them many formal talks and other addresses. The book additionally it features a handful of tablets he wrote during this period. Now, I'll leave it to Adib to provide more on the subject, but the Universal House of Justice has called this a reliable account of Abdu'l-Bahā's travels in the West and an authentic record of his utterances. So because of this statement from the Universal House of Justice, we gain just a richer perspective on Abdu'l-Bahā's second journey to Europe and the timeless lessons he taught there. So about Adib, just to start off, the Utterance Project, if anyone has seen this before, theutteranceproject.com, please take a look at it. You'll be able to see the writings of the Bab, of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Bahá, in the mother tongue where it was written, now spoken, so you can hear and feel the word as it would be spoken and read out loud. And in addition to that, translated such that you can, with a feeling of understanding, when you hear the word as it is written, you can understand it in your mother tongue. Now, it's in English that the translation is, but the hope is that others in other languages too will also learn one day. But that being said, it's a phenomenal start to something that many people in the future can take up and proliferate this effort. Secondly, Adib received his bachelor's degree in communication studies from the University of Texas at Austin in 2012, and his master's in learning technologies from that same institution in 2015. No wonder the utteranceproject.com is so good. During his last year of graduate school, he spent a summer abroad in Jordan to study the fundamentals of classic Arabic, with the goal of being able to understand the Arabic Baha'i writings. Impressive, right? Well enough to be able to translate them. He has been working in the field of e-learning design and development for the past 11 years. Adib has contributed articles on various Baha'i topics to online spaces like Iran Press Watch, the Baha'i Library Online, and BahaiTeachings.org, as well as peer-reviewed publications such as The Lights of Irfan and Baha'i Studies Review. He has also self-published one book, Debunking the Myths, and co-authored a book with his parents, The Secrets of True Happiness, which was published by George Ronald. Adib has a website that features many of his provisional translations. And again, as mentioned, please visit theutteranceproject.com. And I welcome Adib. Adib, welcome. It was not as short as I could make it, but I think we got there somewhat, right?
It was a very kind introduction, John. Thank you so much.
So
So with, oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
no much further ado, just everyone who's joining us, please, if you have a friend who wants to join in, share the clearwaterbahais.org link so they can join under activities and events. Again, we apologize earlier for the technical difficulties. Please, Adib, sorry about that.
Not a problem at all. Let me go ahead and, like you said, without further ado, I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see. So, we want this one. And let's go beginning. So you should be seeing just the title slide in full screen. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
That's what we're seeing.
Yes.
Great. Great. Thank you for confirming that. Okay. Well, again, John, I want to thank you for that very kind introduction. Much appreciated. And to everyone else in the audience, hello. I'm very happy to be with all of you here this morning, tonight, whatever part of the world you may be in. I know we have people from here and there. So, as was mentioned at the top of the introduction, I'm going to be talking to you today about Abdu'l-Bahā's second journey throughout Europe, as it was chronicled by one of his secretaries, Mirza Mahmud Zarghani. And I call it the second journey, and this is also why the title of the presentation of the book includes 1912 to 1913, to distinguish it from Abdu'l-Bahā's first journey to Europe, which he had undertaken toward the end of 1911. However, that first journey is outside the scope of the chronicle covered in this presentation, so we'll only be talking about the second journey. So I wanted to start by giving just a bit of background on the original chronicle and the history of its publication and translation, since this has been a source of confusion for some people. The chronicle was originally written in Persian and in 2 volumes. Pictured here is volume 1, which covers Abdu'l-Bahā's travels in America from April to December 1912. It was first published in Bombay in 1914, and then reprinted twice in Germany in the 1980s. In 1998, an English translation of it, which was done by the late Mohi Sobhani and his collaborator, the late Shirley Macias, was published by George Ronald, who then reprinted the book with a new cover in 2012. And just a quick note here to say that apart from this new cover you're seeing, the second printing of the translation was totally identical to the first printing. There weren't any content changes. And then we have volume 2, which covers Abdu'l-Bahā's subsequent travels throughout Europe, and which, as I said before, is the focus of this presentation. My translation of it was just published by George Ronald, and I also put together a supplement to it, which is freely available online. The supplement features transcripts of 200 talks or other verbal remarks by Abdu'l-Bahā of various provenances and degrees of authenticity that align with the timeline of this volume, but which may not have been quoted in it for lack of space. So in a sense, it's kind of meant to flesh out the words of Abdu'l-Bahā that were recorded in the original volume. This supplement also contains my translations of 27 tablets from Abdu'l-Bahā regarding his journey to the West. And all of those translations, as with the translations of Abdu'l-Bahā's words in the chronicle itself, were reviewed for accuracy at the Baha'i World Center. Additionally, the supplement includes my translation of a fairly short biography of Mirza Mahmud Zarghani, the chronicler who wrote the 2 volumes of the original diary. In many cases, the full transcripts of the talks Mahmud Zarghani mentions in this volume of his chronicle, again, are not actually included there, presumably for lack of space. But early translations of them into English can be found in the supplement, which is why I'm dwelling on it so much here, because I feel it is a pretty important companion to the book that should not be overlooked. One thing that makes the 2 volumes of this chronicle unique, and especially important, is that they seem to have been reviewed by Abdu'l-Bahá himself. At the end of each volume, Mahmud Zarghani mentions explicitly that he presented Abdu'l-Bahá with his account. And we also have an eyewitness record of this from Ahmad Sohrab, one of Abdu'l-Bahā's other secretaries. And it's probably for this reason that in a letter from the Universal House of Justice dated April 30th, 1984, they refer to the original volumes of this chronicle as constituting, quote, a reliable account of Abdu'l-Bahā's travels in the West and an authentic record of his utterances, end quote. This is the same quote that John kindly read from as part of the introduction. So in hearing that quote, to my mind, it means that while the words attributed to Abdu'l-Bahá in it do not have the status of sacred text, per se, because they weren't written by Abdu'l-Bahá himself, they still definitely carry much more weight than unverified pilgrim's notes. Now, having said all that, let's go ahead and dive into the second volume. Obviously, there's only so much I can cover in this limited amount of time, so I'm just going to give you highlights from each stage of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey. On December 5th, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá concludes his journey throughout the United States and sets sail for England, arriving there about a week later. Then, on January 6, 1913, he takes a short trip to Scotland, returning to England on January 10th. On January 21st, he leaves England for France, where he stays for more than 2 months. On April 1st, he sets off for Germany, and a week after that, he goes to Hungary. 10 days later, he travels to Austria. Then, on April 24th, he returns to Germany, and then on the 1st of May, he returns to France. Once again, he stays in this country for a considerable period, this time a month and a half. And eventually, on June 13th, he sets sail from France to Egypt, bidding farewell to the West at last. He stays in Egypt for 5.5 months before finally setting sail on December 2nd for the Holy Land, where he arrives on December 5th. So, to begin, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue set sail from America on December 5th, 1912. They sailed on the Celtic, which was an ocean liner owned by the White Star Line, a British company. He stayed in a stateroom on the upper deck while his retinue lodged in the lower deck, but they all spent their time together for the most part. He would drink Persian tea every morning and afternoon during this voyage, sometimes in his room, sometimes outside, and he would often take walks in front of his room before having his lunch and dinner. In fact, he was very fond of walking as a form of exercise. In spite of his advanced age, being almost 70 at the time, he did it all the time, and his long walks are mentioned several times throughout this chronicle. The circumstances of this voyage to England changed from day to day. Sometimes the waters were calm, at others the ocean became turbulent. And Mahmud Zarghani mentions the rising and falling of towering waves at one point. That was a direct quote. Also, there was a band of some sort. It was probably an orchestra, given the nature of the ship, that would play on a stage inside the ship several times after each meal over the course of the day to entertain the passengers. I've mentioned Abdu'l-Bahā's retinue at least a couple of times now. So to give you some more insight into who that consisted of, we have Mirza Mahmud Zarghani, who wrote down everything that was happening, Mirza Ahmad Sohrab, who served as Abdu'l-Bahā's interpreter, translating his talks and other remarks into English in real time, and Sayyid Asadullah Rumi, who often prepared Abdu'l-Bahā's meals. It's worth mentioning here that Ahmad Sohrab also wrote his own English account of everything that was happening, in the form of daily letters he would send to a Baha'i in America. These letters are not published. They're held at the National Baha'i Archives in Wilmette, Illinois. But the staff there kindly provided me with scans of the letters at my request, and these were very useful to my work because they often filled in gaps or provided clarification on certain details recorded by Mahmud Zarghani. And you're going to see some examples of that as we go on. So, on December 5th, which was the first day of Abdu'l-Bahá's voyage from New York to Liverpool, he made these remarks about the journey throughout America he had just concluded. The significance of this journey will become known in the future. Up until the present time, such a thing has not happened before, and has never been witnessed in any age. That a person from the East should travel to the farthest cities of the West, teaching the cause of God, promulgating its new precepts, and expounding upon questions of theology, in temples and in gatherings of various peoples, with such resolve and conviction that none is able to reject or object to them. On the contrary, all have been enamored of and enraptured by these ideas, and express their deepest reverence for them. A few days later, on December 10th, or December 9th, according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá rewards a ship attendant for his trustworthiness. Mahmud Zarghani writes, "The master offered a fruit basket to one of the attendants. As it happened, a small box that belonged to him had fallen into that basket. After a few minutes, the attendant brought the box back to the master. The master rejoiced at the trustworthiness of this attendant, so much so that he gave the box back to him and tipped him $1. He said to the attendant, 'Your honesty and trustworthiness have pleased me greatly.' The master then gave a lengthy exposition on the merits of trustworthiness. This talk was enlightening and served to remind those present of the benefits of this virtue." So among these remarks on this virtue that were just mentioned, Sohrab writes that Abdu'l-Bahá referred to trustworthiness as, quote, "the most brilliant jewel in the diadem which crowns man's heavenly attributes," end quote. And unfortunately, that one snippet seems to be the only direct quote from this lengthy exposition on the merits of trustworthiness that has survived. So on December 13th, 1912, the ship arrives in Liverpool. I'm going to start each section, each chapter of this presentation, if you will, which is divided up into the various countries Abdu'l-Bahá visited, by giving kind of an overview of the different topics Abdu'l-Bahá discussed in each place. So while in the United Kingdom, and this is meant to encompass both his time in England and then Scotland and then returning to England, we have the independent investigation of truth, the unity of all the divine religions, and also the oneness of humanity, the power of love and unity, the equality of men and women. This was especially important in his discussions with suffragettes, harmony of science and religion, the need to eliminate prejudice and promote universal peace, the need to overcome blind imitation, the ways of the past, those sorts of things, and also age-old superstitions. So we're just going to do one highlight from Abdu'l-Bahá's brief stay in Liverpool, which is where the ship first arrived in England. And that concerns the talk he gave at a Baptist church called the Pembroke Chapel. The church was packed with people on that occasion. Ahmad Sohrab, rather incredibly to me anyway, notes that 1,500 people were in attendance. And Abdu'l-Bahá spoke to them on the essential unity of all religions, the detriments of blind imitation, the spread of this new and wondrous cause, meaning the Baha'i faith, and the greatness and veracity of Islam, which is just another way of saying the status of Islam as a true religion of divine origin. So after speaking, rather before and after speaking, Abdu'l-Bahá is applauded vigorously, and he closes with a prayer at the request of the Reverend Donald Fraser, who showers him with even more praise afterwards. As with many of Abdu'l-Bahá's talks mentioned in this presentation, a translation of this one into English can be found in the online supplement to the book, rather than the book itself, for lack of space. From there, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to London, skipping ahead a few days, where he is greeted at Lime Street Station by a group of Baha'is that includes Lady Blomfield, who pleads with Abdu'l-Bahá to stay at her home, and he eventually agrees to do this. Describing that scene, Mahmud Zarghani writes, "The cries of jubilation they raised were so loud as to draw the attention of those around them, and demonstrate to those onlookers the ardor of their devotion to the Master." A couple of days later, On December 18th, Abdu'l-Bahá meets with the eminent Orientalist Professor Edward Granville Brown for the first time in more than 20 years. The last time they had crossed paths, as some of you will remember, was in Akka, when Brown had his famous interview with Baha'u'llah in April 1890. Brown began their conversation by wanting to apologize for some of his past mistakes. I'm not going to go into detail on those or expand on them really here in the interest of time, but suffice it to say that Abdu'l-Bahá preferred to be merciful and insist that they change the subject, saying, "We should discuss other matters, matters that will generate feelings of love." At one point, as they were discussing the importance of balancing knowledge with a good character, Abdu'l-Bahá said, "If the acquisition of knowledge is coupled with the best of characters, that knowledge will bring about marvelous results. Material progress and civilization alone will not suffice, and the acquisition of knowledge by itself will not result in complete prosperity." At Brown's request, he meets with Abdu'l-Bahá again the next day, December 19th, and Abdu'l-Bahá would go on to meet with Brown a third and final time in Paris a few months later on March 9th. In his own account, Ahmad Sohrab writes that Abdu'l-Bahá and Edward Brown conversed in Persian during each of these meetings, and that the first one, mentioned on this slide, lasted for nearly an hour, while the second one went for 2 hours. Let's jump ahead now to Christmas Day. Abdu'l-Bahá visits this factory building that was being leased to the Salvation Army Center for use as a night shelter, where he spoke to a gathering of the poor to tell them that poverty is beloved by God. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "Those in the audience were so moved by these words, stirred to their very cores, that they repeatedly applauded the master and raised uproars of jubilation." Since this was Christmas Day, Abdu'l-Bahá treated everyone to dinner by giving them each some money. Again, Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "So great was the clamor raised by those present, and so vigorous the praises and benedictions they heaped upon the master, that the walls of that space seemed to shake." It seems we don't know exactly how many people were present on this occasion. Mahmoud Zarghani says there were about 500. That's actually the most conservative of the figures we have, because Ahmad Sohrab says 700. And Isabel Fraser, who took down an account of the whole occasion, says there were as many as 1,000. In any case, afterwards, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the second floor of this building to look at the sleeping accommodations and other amenities. According to Mahmoud Zarghani, the master considered this arrangement highly commendable, inasmuch as it was a kind service that provided support to the poor. 2 days later, on December 27th, Abdu'l-Bahá addresses another gathering of the poor, this time at the Cedars Club. What's very special about this gathering is that there were many children who believed that Abdu'l-Bahá was Santa Claus, or Father Christmas as he's known in the UK. According to an account of this event by Louise Heron Oliphant, there were about 60 mothers and more than 100 children. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "He kissed the children, caressed them tenderly, and gave each one of them a present. Whenever the children would attain his presence, cherishing the hope of his grace, they would invariably declare, 'This is the divine Khizr. These are heavenly showers of grace.' This is because the children of America and Europe believe that Khizr appears to children at Christmas time and gives them presents." And I need to clarify here that Khizr is the name of a prophetic figure in Islam who is mentioned indirectly in the Quran as the spiritual guide of Moses. So I've never been able to figure out why Mahmoud Zarghani equated such a figure with Santa Claus or Father Christmas, but I've always found it very interesting and frankly quite amusing that he did. In any case, moving ahead now to New Year's Eve, when Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to Oxford. He starts by paying a visit to the Baha'i professor Thomas Kelly Cheney and his wife Elizabeth Gibson Cheney. T.K. Cheney was an invalid at this time. He was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. But he had written some pieces on the Baha'i faith, and for this reason Abdu'l-Bahá loved him very much. Mahmoud Zarghani writes that he repeatedly kissed the professor's forehead and cheeks, and tenderly stroked his face and hair with his blessed hand. From there, Abdu'l-Bahá sets out for the University of Oxford, where he speaks to a distinguished audience at Manchester College. This is rather still today, one of the constituent colleges of the University of Oxford, and concludes the gathering with a prayer. After that, he returns to the Cheney residence and gives a talk to some professors and other university officials before going back to London. In Mahmoud Zarghani's entry a couple of months later, on March 4th, 1913, he quotes Abdu'l-Bahá as saying that, quote, "The writings of Professor Cheney will be weighed against the writings of his peers from former times, and the greatness of this cause will then become known." End quote. Then, on January 6, 1913, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue take a short trip to Scotland, specifically to Edinburgh, which is its capital. The next day, on January 7th, Abdu'l-Bahá visited the Outlook Tower, an old observatory that a Scottish polymath named Patrick Geddes had bought and turned into a center of learning. One of the unique things about this tower is that it had something called a camera obscura. This is a darkened chamber in which the image of an object is received through a small opening or lens and projected onto a surface in real time, allowing viewers to watch outside scenes as if from a movie without the use of a modern camera. This is called pinhole projection, and in describing it, Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "All the buildings and streets, the carriages and trains, the coming and going of various people, even the smoke billowing from the factories, all these took on the form of motion pictures, and this was met with ample praise from the master." In the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks to the local Esperanto society about the implementation of a universal language. The venue was at capacity, with 1,000 people seated inside, so a few hundred more attendees had to stand outside. That same day, or the following day, according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá went to the Edinburgh College of Art and the North Canongate School, which Mahmoud Zarghani calls a school for poor children. In the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá delivered an address at Rainey Hall, which was a divinity school. The gathering was organized by the Outlook Tower Society, presided over by the aforementioned Patrick Geddes, and attended by eminent clergymen and other distinguished people. In this talk, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke about the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the calamities that have befallen the cause, and the unstoppable exaltation of God's word. When he finished speaking, some of the prominent men who were present rose to praise him. This included Dr. Alexander Hugh Freeland Barber, a Scottish gynecologist, the Reverend Alexander B. Robb, the Reverend Robert B. Drummond, and, of course, Patrick Geddes himself, pictured here, who was the chairman of that gathering. After that short trip to Scotland, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue returned to England. A few days into that sojourn, on January 15th, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to Clifton, which is a suburb of the city of Bristol. He spends the night at the Clifton Guest House, which was a hotel owned by Wellesley Tudor Pole, an early British Baha'i. And in the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a talk there on the Lesser Peace. Once again, the place was packed, and really surprisingly, Mahmoud Zarghani writes that every member of the audience came up to Abdu'l-Bahá afterwards, kneeled before him, took hold of his hands and the hem of his garment, and sought his blessings. Mind you, they weren't bowing themselves down or prostrating themselves to the ground, but getting down on one knee, or both of their knees, still makes for quite a sight. And indeed, it really was a most impressive sight, especially for a Persian in the audience who was not a Baha'i. This was a man named Dost Muhammad Khan, to whom Mahmoud Zarghani refers by his state title of Mu'ayyirul Mamalik. Here is how Mahmoud describes that gentleman's reaction to what he was witnessing. As this scene was taking place, my eyes fell upon the Mu'ayyirul Mamalik, who had accompanied the master on this trip, meaning to Clifton, Bristol. I noticed that he was looking, with complete astonishment, upon the reverence and humility that the most distinguished people of England were showing before the power of this cause and the might of the master. And I saw that he was crying profusely, so much so that it aroused great tenderness within me. Indeed, to see this gentleman so profoundly affected by this scene moved me, in turn, to shed tears of ecstasy. I rejoiced in my heart of hearts, and gave thanks for those promised confirmations that had been vouchsafed from the Abha kingdom. After spending the night at the Clifton guest house, like I mentioned before, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue returned to London the next day. On January 17th, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to the town of Woking, where he speaks at two gatherings. First, a private luncheon at the building for a British journal called the Asiatic Quarterly Review, attended by Muslims, Christians, and certain dignitaries. And then a public event at the Shah Jahan Mosque, again attended by Muslims, Christians, and others. At the mosque, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks about the foundation and truth of the divine religions, and expounds the teachings of universal peace and oneness of humanity. If memory serves, I believe that at least some of the audience had to stand outside, and in spite of the fact that it was raining, they stayed put and listened with rapt attention. This is one of the rare cases where we actually have the full transcript of the original talk in Persian. It's kind of buried in an issue of Star of the West, which was an early Baha'i magazine, and for that reason it has not gotten much attention up until now, at least as far as I can tell. But my provisional translation of that talk into English is included in the supplement of the book. And something very interesting here is that Abdu'l-Bahá actually concludes his Persian address at this mosque with an Arabic prayer that has a very Quranic flavor to it. It is unmistakably similar to the first chapter of the Quran, the Surah Fatihah. And this shows very clearly how attuned he was to the sensibilities of his audience and the venue where he was speaking. And come to think of it, I think this may be the only mosque in the West that Abdu'l-Bahá ever visited, let alone spoke at, which only makes this already incredible occasion that much more remarkable. A few days later, Abdu'l-Bahá leaves England for the last time and heads to France. As you can see from these dates, this sojourn lasted for more than 2 months. That is a lot of ground to cover, and we obviously can't do it all here. So I want to start this portion of the presentation with an overview of the places Abdu'l-Bahá went to and the people he associated with before we get into some of the specific days. Because one thing to know about Abdu'l-Bahá's time in Paris in 1913 is that he did not speak at very many large gatherings and grand halls like he did in England and other places in Europe. Rather, he mostly spent his time talking with visitors he received at his residence or paying visits to various people at their homes. So these were smaller, more intimate settings. But in fact, before we get to the people, let's cover some of the topics that he discussed over these, not just these next 2 months, but also during his return to France, subsequent months, several months later. He spoke about spiritual education and development, the Baha'i faith from multiple perspectives, meaning its history, its teachings, the need to promote it, various kinds of unity of mankind, between the divine religions, between East and West, teaching the cause of God, the difference between spiritual and material aspects of life. This was especially important in a place like France, which was very much characterized by materialism and even hedonism at the time. The covenant of God, or Baha'u'llah, it's phrased differently in this book in various ways. The need for spiritual renewal or awakening, again, really trying to shake people from their materialistic slumber, and the need for universal peace, the elimination of prejudices, really the need to do this, and lastly, the harmony between science and religion. That's just a sample. It's not meant to be exhaustive. But now getting into some of those places that were associated with this sojourn of Abdu'l-Bahá's, we have an apartment building on 30 Rue Saint-Didier, where Abdu'l-Bahá stayed for the first couple of months of the sojourn. This later became known as the Cecile Hotel, as is mentioned at the top of this postcard. On March 19th, he and his retinue moved into the Martha Pension. This was a place calling themselves a family hotel. That's how it's referred to also in this chronicle. That hotel was located on Lauriston Street, and it is not pictured here simply because I couldn't find a photo of it. And here we have another postcard, this one showing the street adjoining Bois de Boulogne, a large public park where Abdu'l-Bahá would go for walks. At that time, there were 2 weekly gatherings held at the homes of 2 Baha'i couples on different weeknights. On Monday nights, there was a gathering at the home of Frank Edwin Scott and Josephine Sanford Scott, American painters who had moved to France. And on Friday nights, There was one at the home of Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, a lawyer and translator of Baha'i texts, and Laura Dreyfus Barney, a writer, artist, and social activist. Abdu'l-Bahá himself would often speak at these gatherings, and sometimes other Baha'is spoke on various topics as well. And these meetings were characterized by abundant love, warmth, and fellowship. For the most part, Abdu'l-Bahá attended both of these weekly gatherings, except for when his poor health or fatigue prevented him from doing so. And I should add quickly here that this portrait of Josephine Scott on the left was taken when she was a young woman, of course. I just used this one because I didn't have a very good portrait of her as an older woman. In reality, she was only 1 year younger than her husband. And of course, Abdu'l-Bahá met with many other Baha'is while in Paris. To name just a few examples, we have Edith Sanderson, an American Baha'i who also held gatherings of her own at her home. Horace Hawley, an American Baha'i who at that time operated an art gallery in France, and then in 1914 returned to America, where he served on the National Spiritual Assembly for many years. Stanwood Cobb, an American Baha'i educator. Haji Abul Hasan Ardakani, known by his title of Haji Amin, who served as trustee of Huququllah for many years. Waliullah and Azizullah Vargha, the sons of the martyred Baha'i poet Ali Muhammad Vargha. That means that these two gentlemen were the brothers of the young Ruhullah, who was also martyred with his father. Mirza Ali Akbar Nakhjavani, an important figure in the early Baha'i community of Baku in today's Azerbaijan, and also the father of the late Ali Nakhjavani, who served on the Universal House of Justice for 40 years. Mirza Ali Akbar Rafsanjani, a young Baha'i travel teacher, and Mirza Agha Khan Ghaem Maghami, a very wealthy Baha'i, and the great-grandson of Mirza Abul Qasim Farahani, known as the Ghaem Magham. He was an eminent Persian statesman of outstanding character who happened to have been a close friend of Baha'u'llah's father. So again, this gentleman was the great-grandson of that esteemed statesman. While in France, Abdu'l-Bahá also met with several political figures, including Saleh Monir Pasha, an Ottoman diplomat who held various posts in the government of the Ottoman Empire, some of which were ministerial in nature. Rashid Pasha, who years earlier had served as governor of the province of Beirut while Abdu'l-Bahá was under house arrest in Akka. And Abdus-Samad Khan, known as Mumtaz Saltaneh, a Persian diplomat who held many posts in his career and was serving at that time as the Persian minister in Paris. And in addition to all those people, as if that weren't enough, Abdu'l-Bahá also met with people of more mystical persuasions, such as Mira al-Fasa, who was so active in the Baha'i community of Paris that many believed her to be a Baha'i, but who in fact displayed a very keen interest in Sufism, and eventually went to India, where she became a Hindu guru, adopting for herself the title of the Mother. And Abdu'l-Bahá also met her husband, Paul Richard, who are both pictured here together. Additionally, Abdu'l-Bahá also met Inayat Khan, a singer, poet, professor of musicology, and founder of the Inayati order of Sufism. So now getting into some specific dates. On February 2nd, we have a lovely account of Abdu'l-Bahá encouraging the believers. Mahmoud Zarghani writes that Mr. Alfred Bernard and his wife Claire Bernard then expressed to the master their regrets that they were possessed of little capacity. If the love of Baha'u'llah is present in a heart, it will be endowed with capacity. Divine love is like a spirit. When a spirit is present in a body, that body is endowed with the capacity to do anything. We were passing by a church today that was built according to the principles of Greek architecture when my companions observed that this church was dedicated to Mary Magdalene. When one considers her outwardly, what capacity did Mary Magdalene have? She was a woman who hailed from a village. There have been many women greater than she was, women descended from the kings of the earth, or numbered with the most renowned of its denizens. Yet since the love of Christ was present in Mary Magdalene's heart, that love endowed her with such capacity that a church in France, such as this one, was built in her name. Thus, anyone who discovers their relationship with God will be endowed with every conceivable capacity. Then do not say, we are bereft of capacity. When the love of Baha'u'llah is present in your hearts, you will possess every conceivable capacity and every measure of worthiness. A couple of days after that, Abdu'l-Bahá is visited by a Persian Baha'i poet named Agha Mirza Hussein Arif, who, like some other Persian Baha'is of his time, revered Abdu'l-Bahá to the point of deifying him or making a god out of him. On that occasion, he recited these verses from a poem he wrote in praise of Abdu'l-Bahá. Benighted do we languish in the darkness, and there is no light more glorious than thee. In truth, I swear upon Bahá himself that no better Baha'i is there than thee. Though all see themselves as slaves to the Lord, this slave is sure no God can surpass thee. Could Moses see thy face upon the mount, all hail this best encounter, would say he. If Asia should be sick and sore afflicted, and Europe its fatal calamity, there's no physician better for this illness, indeed no better remedy than thee. After quoting these verses in his chronicle, Mahmud Zarghani writes, a great many individuals not affiliated with the faith and belonging to every land imaginable composed such poems of praise and adoration and presented them before the master. The majority of these he refused to accept, and he forbade them from being disseminated and published. Indeed, even the sincere praises that believers and others alike would express were for the most part not compatible with the master's temperament and contrary to his complete and total servitude at the divine threshold, and he would reject them accordingly. The next day, Abdu'l-Bahá and some Persian Baha'is visit the Eiffel Tower, where they take this well-known photograph. I'm sure many of you have seen it before, and now you're about to get the context for it. Mahmud Zarghani writes, the Persian believers wished to take a photograph with the master that day, and it was taken as he was standing underneath the Eiffel Tower alongside a number of believers and servants of the sacred threshold. Both before the picture was taken and afterwards, those devoted souls brimmed with delight as they relished the elegant majesty and graceful grandeur of the master's gate. A few days later, on February 12th, Abdu'l-Bahá gives an evening address to the Paris Esperanto group at the Hôtel Moderne. According to Mahmud Zarghani, the master's talk roused his audience to such irrepressible excitement that they punctuated his delivery with rapturous laughter, praise, and applause. Such was their state even as they had dinner afterwards, and as the banquet drew to a close, each and every one of them approached the master and expressed their sincere devotion and deference to him. Those who had not previously had a chance to attain the master's presence requested permission to do so, and when it was granted them, they asked him for the address of the residence where he was staying. Again, as with several of the talks mentioned in this presentation, a translation of this one into English can be found in the online supplement to the book. About a week later, while some of the Baha'is of Paris are gathered at Abdu'l-Bahá's apartment, he rallies them with some rousing admonitions. Mahmud Zarghani writes, among the remarks the master made in the talk he gave to the public gathering that morning were these: nothing but the cause of God is worthy of your attachment. All affairs but those which pertain to God are fleeting and undeserving of mention. Mahmud Zarghani continues, that day the master repeatedly encouraged the Baha'is, in particular Miss Sanderson, to teach the cause, exhorting them with these words: speak at the gatherings, be as a flame of fire and a brilliant star. Thereby you shall illumine this city. I work day and night to help you spread your wings, that you might help others to progress, and guide them to promulgate the cause in turn. Otherwise, should a person not be aided and confirmed in the cause of God, he will bear no fruit, and his life shall have failed to make its mark. Skipping ahead by a little more than a month now, on March 27th, or March 31st, according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá met with Henri Moser, who was a Swiss traveler and art collector, and also with his wife, Sophie. Henri Moser was about the same age as Abdu'l-Bahá. He had traveled in Central Asia, including to Bukhara and Ashgabad, and he had accumulated a priceless collection of Oriental weapons and artifacts. Abdu'l-Bahá speaks with them for a while. Mahmud Zarghani actually has a pretty extensive record of their exchanges, and the Mosers respond very favorably to Abdu'l-Bahā's remarks. Here's a snippet of what they said. We are well informed of this cause. It is truly a light from the east, and it will surely become the means through which peace is established. The thing about this cause which truly demands careful attention is that spiritual power that will conduce to peace and unity. Were it not for this, we too have held many gatherings that were all devoted to peace, yet every one of them has proven futile and yielded no effort. At the end of their conversation, the Mosers repeatedly invite Abdu'l-Bahá to come to their residence for the summer, but he politely declines the invitation, insisting that he and his retinue are on a mission and that they need to see it through to the end. This takes us to the first of Abdu'l-Bahá's two brief sojourns in Germany. So, an overview of some topics he discussed while in that country. We have the power of Baha'u'llah's revelation to unite people from different backgrounds, the importance of spiritual awakening and recognizing the manifestation of God, the need for moral and spiritual education in order to realize human potential, the significance of children's spiritual education. This was prompted by many, many meetings with parents while their children were also present at various occasions in Germany. The bounties bestowed upon Stuttgart specifically and its receptivity to the Baha'i message, universal peace and the oneness of humanity, kind of a red thread throughout everywhere that he spoke at, the power of divine confirmations and the spread of the Baha'i teachings, and the last in this non-exhaustive sample, firmness in the covenant and steadfastness in faith. So shortly after arriving in the city of Stuttgart, while gathered with some of the Baha'is there, he said, "Behold what the grace and bounty of Baha'u'llah have done. Observe where we are and where you are. See how this grace and bounty have gathered us together in one place, how they have bound the hearts to one another and delighted the souls with the glad tidings of God. What bonds are these? What love is this, that derive their power from no earthly source? To outward seeming, neither had we heard the name of Stuttgart, nor had you all heard the name of Nur. The power of the word of God has rent the veils asunder. How wonderfully has this power united us! How completely has it bound the hearts together! How remarkably has it made the East and the West as one! How it has brought the far removed so close together and turned strangers into friends." The day after that, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to Esslingen, where he attends a festival held in his honor on behalf of the Baha'i children. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "When the master arrived, he found that all the children, dressed in their school uniforms, had formed a neatly ordered line extending from the entrance of the building all the way to its main room. They all expressed their reverence for the master and exclaimed, 'Allahu Abha.' The master walked gracefully among those children, handing sweets to each and every one of them and caressing them tenderly." And here are some of the remarks Abdu'l-Bahá made at this children's festival. "What precious children these are! I beseech God to send down from the heavens a blessing on these children, that even as the flowers of the most glorious garden, they may flourish with verdure. May the light of the love of God make each of them as brilliant lamps, and may they derive their portion of splendor shining from the day star of the most glorious paradise. These children are the fruits of the tree of the love of God. They are the saplings of the Abha kingdom. Their hearts are pure to the utmost, and their souls are as undefiled and delicate as can be. I hope, therefore, that even as pearls they may be nurtured in the shell of the love of God." After spending a few more days in Germany, Abdu'l-Bahá sets out for Hungary. So what did he speak about while in Hungary? Again, we have the oneness of humanity and universal peace, saving people from prejudices and harmful imitations, as a mission of his journey, that is. The teachings of Baha'u'llah on the unity of religions and races, once again really driving that point home. God's love for all humanity, using human powers to serve humanity rather than destroy it and the things it has built. The fact that spiritual civilizations always seems to have originated from the East and then disseminates to the West. The unity of East and West. The need for a unifying spiritual power, namely the Baha'i faith, to achieve world peace. From a more biographical perspective, the life and teachings of Baha'u'llah himself. And lastly, the laws and precepts of God as the key to humanity's true freedom. So shortly after Abdu'l-Bahá's arrival in Budapest, Abdu'l-Bahá visits the eminent professor traveler and Orientalist Armin Vamberi. Here is Mahmoud Zarghani's summary of that visit. In the afternoon, the master paid a visit to the renowned philosopher Professor Vamberi, who was sick at the time. This professor had a strong command of Persian, Arabic, and Turkish. The professor listened to the master's words and was profoundly affected by what he heard. He considered the master's mighty endeavors to be truly extraordinary. On several occasions from that point forward, he lauded the principles and ordinances of this revelation as the most potent cure for the inveterate diseases afflicting the peoples of the earth. And he arose to promote the principles of this most great cause with the utmost devotion and conviction. Vamberi called on Abdu'l-Bahá the next day, but he was not home. And Abdu'l-Bahá would pay Vamberi a second visit the day after that, on April 14th. Following Abdu'l-Bahá's departure from Hungary, he and Vamberi have a little more written correspondence that you can find in the full book. It's very much worth noting that Vamberi accepted the Bahá'í faith as a result of Abdu'l-Bahá's visit to Hungary, as this wording toward the end of this quote by Mahmoud Zarghani suggests. And speaking of this date, April 14th, Abdu'l-Bahá gave an address that evening to the Turanian, or Turanian Society, at the Hungarian National Museum. This was attended by hundreds of people in spite of unseasonably cold weather. Remember, this was in April, and yet Mahmoud Zarghani mentions that a fierce blizzard was raging just the day before. And this is one of those rare cases where we have an authenticated Persian transcript of this talk. It was actually made available on the Bahá'í Reference Library just a few months ago, and you can find my provisional translation of it into English in the supplement of the book. So here's an excerpt from Mahmoud Zarghani's description of that event. The imposing power he, meaning Abdu'l-Bahá, projected at that gathering captivated the attention and enraptured the hearts of those present more than on any other such occasion. Indeed, their ecstasy and delight could be likened to the commotion of the gathering crowd on the day of resurrection. However, the sudden onset of such intensely cold weather must have posed something of a shock to Abdu'l-Bahá's system, because the very next day he fell sick with a cold that waxed and waned for the next several months. In fact, it didn't really leave him until he finally returned to Egypt in the summer, where it was, of course, much warmer than it was in Hungary. A few days after that event, Abdu'l-Bahá leaves Hungary for Austria, staying in Vienna for about a week. And among the things he spoke about while in Austria were these: the progress of souls towards eternal stations, the need to overcome materialism and blind imitation through spirituality, spiritual education, spiritual development, that sort of thing, the distinction of humanity consisting in spirituality and divine civilization rather than our material dimension, eternal peace and happiness being obtainable by entering the kingdom of God, virtues developed through following heavenly teachings, the importance of spiritual progress over physical progress, another common theme everywhere he went, the need to lend spiritual assistance to others who are in need of it, importance of holding spiritual gatherings, and lastly, the inclusiveness and transformative power of Baha'u'llah's cause, really as an all-encompassing entity. Abdu'l-Bahá had been invited to Austria by two theosophists, Johann Kreutz and Marie Thaler. And on his first full day there, Abdu'l-Bahá says the following to both of them: "Your love is the reason I have come here. I have come to see you, not to go on leisurely excursions, for we are in search of people, and wherever we find them, it brings us matchless joy. We hope that this meeting with us will yield results that shall illumine the hearts and irradiate the souls with the light of supreme guidance. Thereby may every eye be brightened and every heart attain everlasting joy and bliss. Thereby may all come together with tranquil souls and well-assured hearts beneath the shade of the pavilion of the oneness of humanity. And thereby may eternal peace, harmony, welfare, and prosperity be realized on earth, for we are all the members of humankind, all the servants of one loving God." Several days later, according to Mahmoud Zarghani, Marie Thaler mentions to Abdu'l-Bahá that she is a Baha'i now. So I assume that that must mean she embraced the faith because of Abdu'l-Bahā's visit, since she seems to have been a theosophist when Abdu'l-Bahá first arrived. So that same day, or 2 days later, by Ahmad Sohrab's account, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the residence of a certain Mrs. Lukaneder, we don't seem to know her first name, and her son Paul, which was high up in a new apartment building. The Lukaneder's home functioned as the lodge of the local Theosophical Society, and it was there that Abdu'l-Bahá gave an extensive address that evening, even though he had completely exhausted himself just getting there. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, although the master was very tired as a result of the cold he had caught in Budapest, he walked up 120 steps of that building nevertheless to get to the main hall of the Theosophical Society. This because the building was still new, and an elevator had not yet been installed to transport people. When he reached the 4th floor, he did not enter the main hall at first, owing to his great fatigue. Instead, he initially went to a different room and conversed with certain individuals. One can well imagine the great strain that must have been placed on the master's body when he then went to the public gathering. In fact, Abdu'l-Bahá himself attests to this fatiguing experience in one of his tablets, which I've translated in the supplement to the book. Here's the relevant passage. Especially taxing was one night in particular when I went to a place where there were 120 stairs made of marble that was cold as ice. I ascended them with exceeding powerlessness and fatigue, and then spoke for 2 hours without interruption. I promoted the word of God, and my talk was accompanied by a comprehensive translation. A few days later, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue have an interesting experience at the Stadtpark, or city park. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, once his visitors had been dismissed, expressing the utmost devotion and ecstasy as they departed, the master said, "Today is a good day. Let us walk for a bit in the garden," meaning the garden at Stadtpark. The master went outside with his attendants, who were wearing their Persian hats and other attire. This drew the attention of onlookers from every direction, which prompted the master to remark, "This clothing of ours is itself an announcer of the cause." When the master reached the park in the center of the city, he found a large number of people there. They all turned to look at him, and most of them approached him from the various corners of the park with curiosity. Mr. Wilhelm Herigel and some other friends discussed the cause of God with them, and provided them with the addresses of both the master's hotel and also the residences of certain believers. On his last day in Vienna, Abdu'l-Bahá meets with Baroness Bertha von Suttner, who in 1905 had become the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Mahmoud Zarghani has given this short description of their meeting. Among the other important individuals who were thoroughly cheered and illumined by having had the bounty of being in the master's presence was Baroness Bertha von Suttner. This woman was an earnest promoter of peace. She was deeply respected and widely renowned, and the master showed her great loving kindness. He spoke to her of universal peace and the Baha'i faith, and this served to gladden her heart, broaden her mind, and brighten her soul. She was then dismissed, and she displayed the utmost devotion as she departed the master's presence. So that's a fairly limited account of the occasion, but Abdu'l-Bahá, Ahmad Sohrab, did record quite a bit of Abdu'l-Bahā's conversation with the Baroness, and you can find his transcript of that in the supplement of the book. Abdu'l-Bahá then returns to Germany and stays there for about a week. During a gathering with some Baha'is, Abdu'l-Bahá has occasion to speak glowingly of Mirza Abul Fazl, the eminent Baha'i scholar, author, and teacher. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, Mr. Friedrich Schweizer then mentioned the translation of certain books written for the cause of God, and spoke highly of the brilliant proof of Mirza Abul Fazl in particular. The master said, "I love him very much. In order to leave himself free to serve the cause of God, he has not married. He is always occupied with promoting the word of God. He has not rested for a single moment of the days of his life. He has either engaged himself in teaching the cause, or set himself to composing treatises, or devoted himself to traveling, or spent his days in prison. He is an exceedingly blessed individual, and it is for this reason that I love him dearly." Ahmad Sohrab's own account of Abdu'l-Bahā's response to Schweizer is largely the same as what Zarghani has recorded here that I just read for you. But Sohrab's version adds this notable remark about Mirza Abul Fazl, which is that he is greater even than the apostles, meaning the apostles of Christ. And of course, Shoghi Effendi would go on to name Mirza Abul Fazl as one of the 19 apostles of Baha'u'llah. So, a wonderful spiritual outgrowth of that remark, you might say. On Abdu'l-Bahá's last day in Germany, he gives many, many words of farewell to the Baha'is of Stuttgart. Mahmoud Zarghani actually recorded several paragraphs worth of parting words and final counsels, and I want to give you just a sample of those here. I want to say goodbye to you, but at the same time, my heart wishes to stay with you. Meeting is just as sweet as parting is bitter, but neither our farewells nor the distance between us will prevent our nearness to one another, inasmuch as the love of Baha'u'llah has bound us with ties that can never be broken. Should the distance between the farthest ends of the earth be between us, it would never preclude the closeness of our hearts and souls, for spiritual sentiments are beyond any doubt. When people meet one another, it is their spirits that take pleasure in this meeting, not their bodies, and their souls that experience degrees of spiritual feeling, not their flesh. Thus, it is this spiritual feeling which is continually present. I commit you all to the sheltering shade of the protection and aid of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Bahá then returns to France for the last time, staying there for nearly a month and a half. To give you an overview of this final sojourn in Paris, before getting into some specific dates, Abdu'l-Bahá stays at the Baltimore Hotel at first, then moves back into the Martha Pension Family Hotel. Here you can see a postcard of the Baltimore Hotel with a note at the top, I think in Ahmad Sohrab's handwriting. It says, "This is the hotel in which the master lives on first floor." And of course, that should be the first floor. English was not Sohrab's native language. And the note is dated May 1st, 1913. Similar to the last time Abdu'l-Bahá was in Paris, he mostly gathered with Baha'is and others in smaller, more intimate settings at his hotel, or their own residences. And this did include the weekly evening gatherings at the Scots on Monday nights and the Dreyfus Barneys on Friday nights. And, unfortunately, he was still dealing with that lingering cold he had caught in Budapest. Something very interesting happens the day after Abdu'l-Bahá returns to Paris. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, "The fame of the grandeur of the master's journey had reached such great proportions that a French newspaper featuring an extensive article which discussed his travels and mentioned the spread of the teachings of peace and unity was shown at that gathering. Included in the article was a full-page color illustration of the master, in which he was standing before a large crowd of Muslims at a mosque in Constantinople, which we would today call Istanbul. He had been depicted while speaking, suggesting that he was imparting counsels. His hands were raised up, and all those present were listening with the utmost humility. The caption accompanying the image stated that a new prophet of Islam was summoning the followers of the various religions to oneness and unity. Seeing this image brought an ample smile to the master's face." And here is the image in question. It is, of course, a fictitious illustration of Abdu'l-Bahá, published in the weekly supplement to a French journal called Le Petit Journal. I say it's fictitious because Abdu'l-Bahá, of course, never spoke at any such place while in Constantinople, and he was not even this age. He was a young man at the time, so it's anachronistic in all kinds of ways. In any case, while Mahmoud Zarghani did paraphrase the caption in the description we just read, a more direct translation of the original French caption would be, "The new prophet of Islam, Abdu'l-Bahá preaching calm and brotherhood in a mosque in Constantinople." Jumping ahead by about 3 weeks, we have this touching and fascinating anecdote from Abdu'l-Bahá, as recorded by Mirza Mahmoud Zarghani, who writes, "Shortly after nightfall, the master went to the home of that handmaid of God, Miss Sanderson. He showed her great loving kindness and commended the way she conversed with him in Persian. He instructed that she read the poems of the Blessed Beauty and commit them to memory. After promising her that she would be confirmed and aided to progress, he said, 'I have not studied Arabic. When I was a child, I had a book of the Bab's prayers in the handwriting of the Blessed Beauty, and I very much yearned to read it. At night I would waken, get out of bed, and peruse this book, and the fervor of my quest, the intensity of my longing would move me to tears. Eventually I saw that I understood Arabic well. My old friends know well that I have not studied Arabic, and yet I speak and write it better than the most eloquent of Arabs. I hope that you make great progress in learning the Persian language. And in fact, Abdu'l-Bahā's hope would be fulfilled, in that many years later, Edith Sanderson translated Durus ad-Diyanat, a presentation on the Baha'i teachings, from Persian into English, and this was published under the title Lessons in Religion. This treatise was written by Sheikh Muhammad Ali Ghaini, an apostle of Baha'u'llah and the nephew of Nabila Akbar, who was himself an apostle of Baha'u'llah. It's worth mentioning that this encouragement from Abdu'l-Bahá was constant. In Mahmud Zarghani's entry for the very next day, May 20th, he writes, quote, "At the end of that gathering, he encouraged Ruhiye Khanum," that is a reference to Miss Sanderson here, not the future wife of Shoghi Effendi, who would have been an infant at the time, encouraged Ruhiye Khanum once again to read the Persian tablets and verses. This encouragement was also not limited just to Edith Sanderson. We have several tablets from Abdu'l-Bahá to other Western Baha'is extending the same encouragement, so we might do well to ponder the importance of learning the original languages of revelation. This takes us to May 23rd, which is a doubly blessed day for Baha'is because it is the day when the Bab declared his mission, and also the day Abdu'l-Bahá was born. This twofold significance was not lost even on those early Baha'is in France, and they cherished the opportunity to commemorate these anniversaries with Abdu'l-Bahá in person. Here's how Mahmud Zarghani's entry for that day begins. According to solar reckoning and European calendars, this day marked the birth of Abdu'l-Bahá and the declaration of the Bab. May the spirits of all living things be a sacrifice for their beneficence. From early in the morning until nighttime, the believers and other friends attained the Master's presence with bouquets of flowers to extend their felicitations. They expressed their utter joy and delight, saying, "Today is a great day. It is the day of your birth, and also the day on which the Bab declared his mission." The Master said, "Indeed, as this day marks the declaration of the Bab, the day when that sun dawned forth and announced the greatest of glad tidings, it is an exceedingly blessed day. By chance, it also happens that I was born on this day." Notice how Abdu'l-Bahá relegated himself to a mere footnote to the events of that day, mentioning his birth only in the most incidental of terms. This is just one of countless instances of his exemplary humility. Later that day, Abdu'l-Bahá attends the Paris Spring Flower Show. Mahmud Zarghani writes, "There were many flowers of all kinds that had been arranged most neatly and exquisitely. Their appearance from every side filled all those present with vigor and gladness. In every corner of that space, there was some color or freshness, some fragrance or delicacy that stirred a crowd to great delight. As it was the anniversary of the Bab's declaration and that of the Master's birth, the fact that this event was, by some happy coincidence, also being held on the same day rejoiced the eager Baha'is in attendance, and added to the attraction and excitement that those lovers of the Master were exhibiting. It was as if that festival had been held specifically to commemorate this auspicious anniversary, and it seemed that all the things of that place had been moved in their ecstasy from beholding the Master to sing songs of congratulations." Jan Yashin, author of Abdu'l-Bahá in France 1911 and 1913, has added these helpful details to that event. This year's open-air exhibit was dedicated to fruit trees and garden implements. Inside the hothouses were orchids, roses, pinks, pelargoniums, also called geraniums, etc. How Abdu'l-Bahá must have enjoyed walking among the mauve and pink sweet peas, dull red rhododendrons, and salmon pink hortensias, which were the highlights of this year's show. And you can see all of those flowers pictured here to the right. Let's skip forward now to June 11th, which was the eve of Abdu'l-Bahā's departure from Paris, when he addressed these parting words to the Baha'is there. "I was in your midst for some time. I have felt and still feel the utmost love towards you. My heart constantly swelled with your love. I have lit the candle of God's love in the niche of your hearts, and expounded the divine admonitions for you. My hope is such that you may strive, so that with every passing day the light of God will make you ever more luminous, and the splendors of the most glorious kingdom will shine with increasing resplendence. Rest not at all as you guide the people aright. Revive these dead ones, alert the uninformed, enkindle the despondent and dispirited with the fire of the love of God. I will ever be waiting to hear good news from you. The next day, Abdu'l-Bahá left Paris for the port city of Marseille, and then set sail for Egypt the day after that, never to return to the West. As you can see from these dates, Abdu'l-Bahá's voyage to Egypt was a very short one. So I'm only going to share one highlight from that stage of his journey. It's actually from the last night of his voyage, as described here by Mahmoud Zarghani. That night, too, was a blessed night. Although the wind was blowing fiercely, the sea was calm, and the weather was clear. In the radiance of the moonlight, the water shimmered like a spotless and sparkling mirror. The sound of the surging waves, lapping the ship on either side, resembled the billowing and babbling of two flowing rivers, and the ship itself seemed to whine like a young fatling. This refers to a young lamb or calf, priding itself in the most great mystery it was carrying. The hearts of his devoted attendants throbbed constantly with this heavenly anthem. This is the mighty mystery, none other than the branch of old, that great secret in whom do we the mercy of the Lord behold. And afterwards they would gently murmur these words: How great indeed this blessed night, which far outranks the best of days. 'Tis on this night our sun so bright will cease to shed his western rays. His trips through Europe's land and seas upon this night have reached their end. His beauteous light, if God should please, will soon to eastern skies extend. That precious friend will disembark to lay his steps on eastern ground, and thereupon will all remark, it's here alone that heaven's found. That takes us to Egypt. Now, as you can see, this is a very long period, about 5.5 months. And unlike the western portions of Mahmoud Zarghani's chronicle, he actually kept this section pretty condensed. So I'm going to emulate his approach in this portion of the presentation by keeping it very high level. So as always, a sectional overview of the topics Abdu'l-Bahá discussed. We have the greatness of the cause of God and how its influence will spread worldwide, the importance of overcoming prejudices, be they religious, racial, patriotic, and so on, how divine confirmations can turn apparent adversity into a means of advancing the faith. There was at least one anecdote that comes to mind right now Abdu'l-Bahá cited, in which a person was trying very hard to lay axe to the root of the cause and really bring it down. And let's just say it ended up backfiring big time and having counterproductive consequences, at least from that agitator's perspective. The bounties bestowed by Baha'u'llah and the importance of appreciating them. Guidance on teaching the faith and awakening people to its significance, especially the Egyptians, whom Abdu'l-Bahá notes more than once here, as does Mahmoud Zarghani, were not a very receptive or spiritually enlightened audience. The primacy, really the precedence over, meaning that the spiritual matter should have over worldly pursuits, the importance of maintaining unity and eschewing dissension, explanations of Baha'i teachings to prominent Egyptians and other visitors. These refer to some visits and occasions Abdu'l-Bahá had while in Egypt. As I mentioned before, the lack of spiritual receptivity among many Egyptians. And in a few cases, Abdu'l-Bahá had occasion to mention that Baha'is should avoid becoming involved in partisan politics, including wanting to become elected onto the parliament in Tehran. That was something that Iranian Baha'is had expressed an interest in. So to start with, I want to give a high-level overview of Abdu'l-Bahá's last sojourn in Egypt because it was so long. He arrives in Port Said on June 17th, that is, and a little less than a month later, he leaves for Ismailiyeh for a change of climate. However, the climate in Ismailiyeh turned out not to be very different, so about a week later, he left for Ramleh, a suburb of Alexandria, and that is where he primarily resided for the next 4.5 months. but he did take a couple of trips within the country afterwards. For example, on October 13th, he went to the small town of Abu Qir, but returned after just 2 days. Then on November 8th, he went to Port Said and came back about a week later. Eventually, on December 2nd, he left Egypt for the last time and set sail for the Holy Land. While in Port Said, Abdu'l-Bahá would speak at public gatherings under a tent that had been pitched on top of the Hotel Sultani. And it was possible, as many of you probably know, to set up the tent that way because buildings in the Middle East are built with flat roofs, not the more triangular ones that we have here in the West often. And Abdu'l-Bahá would receive private audiences at the home of Consul Ahmad Effendi Yazdi, who was a Baha'i. Here on the right, we have a photo of that tent on top of the Hotel Sultani. Mahmoud Zarghani is seated in the front row on the right. And in fact, this photo actually comes from the original Persian Chronicle. I was able to include a few such photos in the translation, thankfully. As was mentioned on the previous slide, Abdu'l-Bahá eventually left Port Said because of its oppressively humid climate, which had a negative effect on his health. But the city he relocated to, called Ismailiyeh, seems to have been just as humid, if not more so. So he left that place too, and ended up in Ramleh, a suburb of Alexandria, where he first lodged at the Hotel Victoria, and then moved into a house that some of the Baha'is rented for him. Abdu'l-Bahā's last sojourn in Ramleh was an eventful one, and we'll get into some of the details on the next slide. But one notable thing I want to point out here is that on August 1st, he received his sister, Bahiyeh Khanum, known as the Greatest Holy Leaf, his daughter, Ziyaye or Ziya Khanum, and his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, who would have been 16 years old at the time. They all stayed in Ramleh for a little over 2 months before returning. Abdu'l-Bahá also spent quite a bit of this time in the company of Mirza Abul Fazl, not just visiting and talking with him, but also personally seeing to his recovery, since he was not well at the time. And indeed, some months later, on January 21st, 1914, unfortunately, he would pass away in Cairo. I mentioned I would give you some more details on what Abdu'l-Bahá did during this stay in Ramleh. Here is how Mahmoud Zarghani has described it. The master sojourned in Ramleh for 5 months. In addition to the Baha'is who came from the east and west to attain his presence, travelers from America and Europe, Jewish teachers from the Syrian Protestant College of Beirut, this is now called the American University of Beirut, and it's also where Shoghi Effendi studied, deputies of the Parliament of Constantinople, again Istanbul, and some of the grandees of Egypt, including even the Khedive, which was like the British viceroy in Egypt, and his name was Abbas Helmi Pasha, pictured here, attained his presence and benefited from the gracious outpourings of the Abha kingdom on several occasions. They expressed their praise and gratitude for having met him round whom all names revolve. That's a title that Baha'u'llah conferred on Abdu'l-Bahá in some of his tablets. And all those blessed souls received his bounty and favor. Now, if you were to look at the book, this one paragraph that I've quoted on this slide here actually has several endnotes with additional details on who these people were, when exactly Abdu'l-Bahá met with them, what the circumstances of their meetings were to the extent that I was able to figure them out, and so on. But for the purposes of this presentation, I thought it would suffice to give you this high-level summary by Mahmoud Zarghani. We now arrive at the very last stage, you might say the ultimate destination of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey, his return to the Holy Land, where he would remain for the rest of his life. This is actually the shortest section of the book. It's only about 7 pages long in the translation, and I believe only a couple of days are covered. And so for that reason, I'm not going to give my customary overview because there weren't that many topics discussed. But even so, I want to highlight events from 2 of Mahmoud Zarghani's entries from this period. The day after his arrival in Haifa, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a trip to the shrine of the Bab and finds a nice surprise along the way. Mahmoud Zarghani writes, as the master was heading for the shrine of the Bab that morning, he found that all the believers, locals and travelers alike, had gathered on Mount Carmel and formed a line in the road he was crossing. When they reached the shrine of the Bab, the master motioned to the friends to enter through the first set of doors. He himself entered through a different door and rested his brow on the sacred threshold. Apart from that particular day, whenever the believers were in his presence as they were making pilgrimage to the shrine of the Bab or Baha'u'llah at other times, the master would first anoint them with fragrant rose water, beckon them to enter, and then perform his own pilgrimage while standing behind everyone else. The next day, at the instruction of Abdu'l-Bahá, the Baha'is take a field trip, if you like, or at least that's how I like to think of it, to the shrine of Baha'u'llah on the outskirts of Akka. Mahmud Zarghani writes, in the morning, the master instructed the believers to take a special trip to Akka to make pilgrimage to the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Accordingly, the friends who lived in the vicinity and those who had traveled from afar, nearly 100 people in all, gathered at the train station. The master took a separate railway carriage for himself. When everyone had boarded the train, they found the cars filled to the brim with Baha'is and entirely empty of anyone else. The songs and melodies they lifted up seemed to reach the clouds of the heavens. The radiance that blossomed from their faces could have put the stars and the moon themselves to shame. The joyful congratulations they offered on Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival were enough to shake every limb and reveal the mysteries of the kingdom to every heart. All his ardent lovers intoned, in unison, the odes and other poems of the revered Vargha, the esteemed Andalib, Janab Bassar, and others, clapping and dancing as they sang. And they continued to sing anthems that saluted the master on his arrival up until they reached Akka. Tears fell from their eyes as they humbled themselves in fervent supplication at the threshold of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. They entreated the Abha kingdom to confirm all the Baha'is and implored the aid and bounty of God. When they concluded their pilgrimage, they commenced festivities of heavenly communion in the pilgrim house at the mansion of Bahji. Shortly after concluding that entry, Mahmud Zarghani ends his chronicle with some closing remarks. He writes, "Praise be to God, the immeasurably glorious, that through the confirmations of the Abha kingdom and the most exalted horizon, and also the assistance and bounty of Abdu'l-Bahá, may my soul and my very being be offered up for such of his loved ones as are firm in his most perfect covenant. This lowly servant has successfully completed his composition of the first and second volumes of this chronicle. I was graciously aided to record episodes from the master's journey with my own pen and then present him with my account. The manifest traces of his travels have only been chronicled to the extent that my comprehension and capacity have allowed me, not in the plenitude of their peerless glory and grandeur. How well has it been said, as thou art truly in thyself, what eye beholdeth thee? All understand no further than their limited degree. I appeal, therefore, to the bounty and beneficence of the heavenly threshold to forgive and pardon me, and I cherish the hope that the readers of these pages may overlook my shortcomings. Through this humble drop, may they apprehend that sea of divine grace, and regard this insignificant atom as having portrayed the dazzling rays of the sun of celestial favor. Every good thing is of God, and every evil thing is from ourselves. I, the lowly servant, Mahmud ibn Ismail Zarghani, do hereby conclude the first and second volumes of this chronicle on the hallowed Mount Carmel, in the vicinity of the shrine of the Bab, and beneath the bountiful shade of Abdu'l-Bahá. May my soul be offered up for the ground which the footsteps of them who are firm in his most perfect covenant have trodden. Mahmud ibn Ismail Zarghani, Sunday, July 19th, 1914. And that marks the end of my presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can turn it back over to the real hosts of this gathering.
Hello, can you see me and hear me?
I can, yes, John. How are you?
Good, good. So I just wanted to say that this was a very beautiful presentation. We thank you very much for presenting today. It is just after our time we typically stop for the day. So aside from capturing questions that people can post on YouTube, on Facebook, and so on in the comments, I think it's a good time for us to stop for today and wait until next time we have another beautiful presentation from you.
You're very kind. I'm sorry it went on a little longer than anticipated to cut into the
Well,
Q&A time.
it's not at all a issue in this case because this is a lot of hard work you put into this, probably thousands of hours as well. So with that being said, it's important we get the full picture. So we appreciate that we're able to go through the chronology as you had been able to show Mahmoud's diary in such a clear and concise way. We really appreciate it. And again, this is months of time, everyone, that is put into this that Mahmoud wrote. So it's not just a story with exposition and of course the plot and all that and the conclusion. This is the life of Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe. So it's amazing that we get to have this glimpse, and the more the merrier, really, Adib. So we appreciate all that you were able to expose us to today. Without much further ado, though, we do need to start closing out. And we want to remind the audience that Adib will be joining us in the future and sharing valuable content like you've seen here. If you liked what you've seen, we really request you find us on YouTube and on Facebook, you like the content and you share it. Because aside from sharing this content and liking it, there's no way for the social media networks to know that this is relevant to people if people like you who find it relevant don't share it. So we hope you do this and that you provide your support for this content by allowing others access to it who may not have seen it otherwise. So to conclude, again, if you want to find more content, we recommend you come to clearwaterbahais.org and you search for Adib Masumian there. Obviously, theutteranceproject.com is an immense resource, which going there alone will be an amazing step for you if this is your first time viewing the website. But aside from all that, Adib also has his own channel. And in addition to that, you've got, of course, the Utterance Project on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch those on YouTube as well. Now, we hope you all have a beautiful Sunday. Again, the Clearwater community welcomes Adib and thanks Adib so much for his real contributions to the world, the Baha'i world, and the world around that is seeking this cultural enrichment. Really being able to see one of the most important anthropological events in the modern era. So it's really important that, Adib, you went through all that schooling to be able to share with us who have not been able to all this beautiful knowledge. Thank you.
It was a privilege. Thank you for the opportunity, John. It was a real pleasure.
We hope you all have a beautiful Sunday. And again, you're welcome to clearwaterbahais.org anytime.